So we know what causes it and we know what treatments are available. But importantly, how do we learn to cope with it?
So when people are first diagnosed, often one of the first things they experience is a grief response. So, when you think about grief, there's all these different components and it's multifaceted. You don't start at one stage, work your way through and go on to the next one to a point where you finally feel okay with everything. People can feel a multitude of different things at once. So you might feel angry at the diagnosis or at a point of sort of despair. People can sometimes experience a little bit of denial. So don't really want to talk about what's going on, sort of feel like it's a difficult thing to sort of come to terms with. Often people will describe a mood change in the person who's diagnosed. They might say to me on the phone, look, I'm really worried about my partner, he's really angry, this isn't the way that he normally is. And often when we just explain to the people that that's just the grief reaction, that he'll get through this, but you just need to support him and talk about it and release those feelings. And deal with the grief like any other grief that you experience throughout your life, then people see an improvement. And there is a light sort of at the end of the tunnel with all that stuff. People do work through it.
It is very common for people who've been recently diagnosed with something like Parkinson's disease to have some form of emotional response. For many people, that's simple anxiety, fear, worry about what's going to happen to them. And sometimes that can be a feeling of loss of what they might have anticipated life was going to hold. For most people, those symptoms are only present for a short period of time, although they may recur when a new stage of Parkinson's develops. If they're not disabling, as in affecting the person's ability to get on with life, then they're not necessarily something that we need to worry about too much. In fact, we'd probably worry if a person didn't have any emotional reaction at all. As a doctor, I'd be much more worried about a person who develops low mood or feelings of excessive worry that are present pretty much all the time, every day, for at least a couple of weeks or more. I tend to take the view that it's also very important to talk to those who are nearest and dearest to you about these things. They're going to be worried about you. They're going to be concerned about how you're coping. They're going to want that information too. If you decide that you're going to manage it on your own, that may work for a while, but then if you come unstuck, you're in trouble. So involving your partner, perhaps your children, and even those at work in helping you understand, and getting them to help you cope at best in whatever environment you enjoy is really important.
Often when people are fairly recently diagnosed, they might seek out their local Parkinson's Association, which can provide lots of different sorts of support. Probably primarily, we like to provide lots of information. Often information that's generally about the illness itself, but also can be about some of the symptoms you might be actually feeling at that particular time. And certainly we're a sounding board where you can ask us questions that you might have forgotten to ask your doctor, or you might feel a bit embarrassed about asking your doctor.
Support groups play a really important role in terms of sort of working through that grief stuff that we talked about before, but also too in terms of coming to terms with Parkinson's and dealing with different changes at different stages. Our support groups are a forum for friendship. They're a forum for learning more about Parkinson's. They're a forum just, I guess, to get together and talk about something that no one ever really talks about. People tell me that, their friends will say to them, how are you going? What do you think of the game of footy on Saturday? They'll talk about everything else except for how are you going with your Parkinson's? How are you coping with all these new things that have sort of come into your life? So our support groups are a good forum for that. People who don't want to join a support group can often find that speaking to a counsellor can be an equally as valuable thing to bring in. I think it's really important to have an opportunity to express a lot of the different feelings that are going on. So whether that be in a public forum like a support group or a more private scene like speaking with a counsellor, by talking about the changes and the new things that are happening in your life, you get an opportunity to work through it and to deal with it and cope better.
Everyone with Parkinson's, when they come to the diagnosis and they start to think about life changes that they're going to have to make, will all be quite different as to how because the illness is very different and it affects everyone very differently. So those decisions, there's nothing hard and fast. again, suggestions that I usually give to people is that you balance out on what your life aims are and your objectives are in life. And also in the limitations that Parkinson's sometimes puts on that. And it might be something as simple as, I've always wanted to go on a big caravanning holiday with my husband. And you might decide, well, actually maybe I'll just stay in hotels instead. Not saying that you don't do things, but sometimes you might just do things a little bit more differently. And there's lots of options available to you. It doesn't mean that suddenly you've got a diagnosis of Parkinson's, you must sit at home and not do anything and wrap yourself in cotton wool. You need to go out there and live life with maybe just a little bit of an altered perspective from time to time.